So what we have here is my collection of mafia gangster books, and if you watch my channel, you'll notice that this is not as expansive as my collection of JFK history books, but it it does show that I have an interest in it, and probably I would say since I was in high school when I did my book report on this book right here, The Godfather, and and I ended up getting a good grade on it. And then I ended up watching the movie. Before that, I didn't even know what The Godfather was about. I had seen the Mad Magazine satire of it. I had no idea it was about the mafia or gangsters or anything. I had sort of gotten interested in it by watching some other movies that came out in the 90s, like Mobsters and Bugsy. But then when I read The Godfather and watched it, I really did get fascinated with this interesting uh, facet of American culture. And I think the idea of this video is I want to talk about the history of the mafia in the United States and how it's gotten tied to our popular culture. And I think these books are a great example to make this point. So starting with this one, The Godfather, this interesting pink version of the book that has pages of photographs from the movie. I will say that the book didn't really follow, or the movie didn't really follow the book all the way. There were subplots in the book that were, especially the subplot about Sonny's mistress, that were pretty kind of crazy, as well as a whole subplot about a character who goes off to Hollywood and tries to become an actor. So there was a lot of extra story in the book that didn't make it into the movie. The movie was really good, and I think it was exactly the right length. The extended version that was on network TV really didn't add anything to it. I think it was a really fantastic movie. So for many people, this movie, The Godfather, and its sequel is what got them interested in researching and studying the mafia in America. So this book, The Godfather, and it still has a look at the Life magazine Family Informer card to sort of go along with The Godfather too. They were very much there was definitely a fad when it came out of this movie. So and the same author wrote this book called Inside Las Vegas, his first book since The Godfather, and it's mostly a picture book, and it talks about Vegas of the 70s, and this is the same Las Vegas that you might see in the movie Casino, a much different Las Vegas that was to a great extent under mafia control. And to my understanding, that is kind of a thing of the past now. A lot of the influence is gone. You see that he's sporting the Gatsby look of the 70s. But this was definitely a time period with Lefty Rosenthal and the Tony Spilatros. I mean, when Vegas was firmly under the thumb of the mafia. And this is what this book is about. A Vegas of yesteryear. If you go to Las Vegas now, that old strip is still preserved, and it's under a ceiling. Like, you actually can visit it, and there's a ceiling that has sort of a screen on it that you can see what the old strip looks like. But it is a thing of the past. And that sort of leads to this book right here, When the Mob Ran Vegas. And you'll see my fellow Alabamian on the cover, Virginia Hill. She's from Alabama. She was a gangster girl. She was connected with Bugsy Siegel and a gambler named Epstein from Chicago. That's the mob museum. I picked up this postcard in Vegas, used it as a bookmark. It used to be a federal building. Um, this book is one I picked up in Vegas, and it talks about how the mafia, how they kind of ushered in Vegas. Although the idea that that Bugsy Siegel had epiphany in the desert and wanted to make the flamingo and name it after Virginia Hill, that is a myth. That's not the case. Um, see if I can show you. The guy who... See, the flamingo was originally built by a guy named Billy Wilkerson. And it was his idea. He's the one who started it. Ben Siegel came in later in the game and took it over. And Billy Wilkerson was still a shareholder, but the idea, the concept of the flamingo was actually not created by Siegel. It was Billy Wilkerson who did it. So for some reason, Ben Siegel got all the credit, and that is a myth. So do your research, and don't believe everything that's in the movies. That's Tony Big Tuna Accardo. He was one of the gunmen in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre before he went to Vegas. This is a great little locally produced, locally published book that if you can get your hands on it, that has all kinds of great stories and information about the beginnings of Las Vegas. Now, the Mafia were definitely involved in Vegas because it was a money printing machine. And the movie Mafia with De Niro and Joe Pesci, that's fairly accurate when it's talking about the story of Lefty Rosenthal and Tony Spilatro, and when they came to Vegas and how their fates ended up not so good. But let's go farther back than just talking about Vegas. Vegas is actually sort of the twilight of the mafia hold of America. If Vegas is the twilight, this is definitely the nighttime here. But let's start at the beginning with when the mafia first started in America and what made it powerful. This is a book called The Last Testament of Lucky Luciano, dictated by Lucky Luciano, this guy. Next to Al Capone, the most famous of the old-time mafia gangsters. The head of one of the five families, de facto ruler of the mafia in America, the chairman of the board, along with Meyer Lansky, Ben Siegel, Vito Genovese, Joe Bonanno, Frank Costello, Joey Donis, all of these original gangsters who started what was called a commission out of the old system, which was called the Mustache Pete's. The original gangsters, the ones who came to America from Italy, the Black Handers, like Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano, they were the ones who ran the original. For example, Masseria and Maranzano ran New York and fought each other over New York. This guy was a protege of both of them and worked to end them both, and he set up the five families that would run and work with each other to run a more organized mob. Now, what gave them power was Prohibition. So what happened was, in 1919, the Volstead Act outlawed the sale of alcohol. And so the mafia went from running extortion rackets and protection rackets and vice to suddenly becoming multi-millionaires by selling alcohol. Whether they got it from the South or from Canada or from Ireland or where have you, people were going to drink, and the mafia brought them the alcohol. Prohibition lasted just long enough for them to become hugely powerful, and it allowed them to diversify when Prohibition ended, but it ended too late. It went all the way from 1919 to 1933. That was 12 years too long. And by the time it ended, they had diversified into gambling, they had diversified into drugs, into all kinds of other rackets, and then they were here to stay. So this book is Lucky Luciano's story from when he came from Sicily to when he helped set up the commission, all the way to his exile back to Italy. It has some funny stories. It talks his creative way of getting out of World War One service, how he got fleeced by some candy manufacturers who tricked him because of his love of candy. There's a lot of funny stories in here, but all things considered, this is a very stark testament of a gangster and the ruthless ways he came to power. He was so powerful that even during World War II, he was recruited to help with the war effort by the U.S. government by using longshoremen to watch for saboteurs. So he was that powerful. And this book I got interested in. I got this a long time ago when I was a teenager because I watched the movie Mobsters about Lucky Luciano, and I wanted to see how true it was. Obviously, they took a lot of liberties, but Mobsters pretty much follows this book. This is Boardwalk Empire, and this is about the. It's not exactly just about the show. I mean, the show is based on a true story. This one chapter of this deals with the true story of Nucky Johnson, who was much different than the character portrayed by Steve Buscemi. Especially, he looked different. He looked more like James Gandolfini than Steve Buscemi. I enjoyed watching Boardwalk Empire for all the period details, but it is very much fiction. There is not a lot of truth in it. It's certainly fun to watch, and it follows some history, but a lot of what is told in the show is very, very fictional. Now, the book doesn't really talk a lot about the Boardwalk Empire time. It only really has one chapter talking about Enoch Johnson. But it talks about all the people, the whole history of Atlantic City that goes way back before the 20s, as you can see. So don't expect this book to be a narrative of the show, and don't expect it to follow the show. There's only one small part of it that covers. This character was in the show played by Dabney Coleman. They changed his name. And that's the real Nucky Johnson. He was a big guy. Let's see his birthday cake, Uncle Nuck. He was the treasurer of Atlantic City, and he was certainly a gangster. He is mentioned in this book by Luciano. He did not die the way they showed in the show at all. He lived until the 1960s. So the other books I have. Well, let me do this one. This is a story about John Gotti. It's not a first-person narrative. It's but this came out when he was still in power, before he was actually put away for good. Playing with neighborhood kids. When I was a teenager, John Gotti was the ultimate gangster. The Godfather Part 3, the Joe Mantegna character was based on John Gotti. The pages are coming out of this. So this is basically his story. Some of the people, he was kind of like, he was the gangster of the 80s and 90s. And the rest of my books the paperbacks at least, are first person accounts that gave us our first inside looks into the mafia. And these are pretty valuable books to have if you want to really understand the reality of the mafia, starting with this one, the Velazzi Papers. This is the book that came out that broke the seal on the mafia. It opened up the hidden secrets. Joseph Velazzi was a gangster, a made man who thought he was going to be whacked when he was in prison by, I think it was Vito Genovese. I think he was, and so to save his own life, he turned to state's evidence and he spilled his guts on all of the rituals and everything about the mafia. So a lot of everything we know about the mafia comes directly from this book, the Velazzi Papers. If you want to understand the mafia, you have to read this. He explains the initiation process, how they bring you into a room and prick your finger and hand you a card with a picture of a saint on it and set that card on fire and make you put the fire out in your hands. And all of the rituals and the symbolism and everything. This book is our first as America. We had the Kefauver Committee, we had Bobby Kennedy, but we never understood anything until we had this book. We only speculated. And he talks about Dutch Schultz and all of the crime families. He opened that secret door. There's Bobby Kennedy, transcripts from hearings. Everything we know or we think we know about the mafia, everything they put in the movies and stuff, really it starts with this book. I know you might have read Wise Guy, but Henry Hill was never a made man. This tells you the real story. Must read if you want to understand things. The next one I want to show you is this one, The Last Mafioso. Another guy who came and spilled his guts. Jimmy the Weasel Fratiano. And he had even more stories to tell. What really happened to Jimmy Hoffa? Who are Frank Sinatra's mafia buddies? Why did a mobster share his mistress with a U.S. president? Why was the mob gunning for Desi Arnaz? What was the real CIA and mafia plot to kill Castro? And in addition to that, he tells you who killed Bugsy Siegel and why. He just spills everything. Jimmy the Weasel was another mafioso who told his story. He's even mentioned in that movie, The Irishman, is one of the famous turncoats. It's the night of the two Tonys. That's depicted in the movie L.A. Confidential. Johnny Roselli, who many JFK conspiracy theorists think he had a lot to do with the Kennedy assassination. There's Frank Sinatra with Paul Castellano and Carlo Gambino and a lot of other prominent mobsters. Dean Martin and Jimmy the Weasel. Big Tuna Ricardo again that we saw in the other book. Frankie Carbo was the man who killed Bugsy Siegel. Mickey Cohen took over the LA Mafia. Jack Dragna and his brothers ran the LA Mafia before Siegel and Cohen. Sam Momo Giancana shared a mistress with JFK. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. Tony Spilotro. If you watch the movie Casino, that's the character Joe Pesci played. When this book was published, he was still alive. This has a lot of information in it. A lot of hidden unsolved murders are solved in it. There's no reason not to believe him because he probably knew. He had a lot to say. This book is called Tell It to the Mafia. This is a very hard to find book by Joe Donato. It's another insider story about a mafioso who became good at changed his life, got religious, cleaned up his act, but it talks about being in the mafia. This is a really hard one to find. So if you really want to get into studying the mafia from a first-hand perspective of primary sources, I would recommend this one too. And he has a ministry now. Or he did. I don't think he's still alive. There's his mugshot. And let's segue into this. You see this sheet? See, I have all of these in this book right here. The United States Treasury Department. Book on the Mafia. All of their... This is a direct copy of all the FBI records. Of all the gangsters. Followed by location. Their mugshots, their criminal associates, a lot of redactions, criminal histories, their aliases, their modus operandi. I mean, it's as thick as a phone book. If you want to research different gangsters, Meyer Lansky. At this point, he was in Florida. Jack Lansky. Look how much they looked like each other. Most people don't even know he existed. At this point, probably the most powerful gangster alive. You can see all their nicknames. Santo Traficante. He was running Cuba for a while. He was one of the biggest mafiosos in the country. Tony Ricardo again. Big Tuna. Member of the Al Capone mob. One of the shooters in the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Capone. Lives with a woman named Mary, and they have a son, Michael. Brothers, James, Ralph, Matthew, Albert J., and the notorious Al, deceased. Look at the nicknames. Jimmy the Baker. Joe Babs. Philly. Big Yuck. Skinny Razor. Nello. Like, here's the Nevada gangsters. Just one. I don't see Spilato. This is kind of older material. So, I mean, almost everyone in this book is deceased. So this is stuff that's okay to be published now. Paul Castellano. To give you an idea, it says attended Appalachian Mafia meeting 1957, is taking the place of his aged father in the Mafia and is considered a strong arm in the organization. He was the guy before John Gotti, so this is where this is at, and he hadn't even taken control yet. Carlo Gambino's brother. There's Carlo Gambino. Attended Appalachian meeting 1957 as one of the mafia leaders from New York City. One of the most powerful mafia leaders in the U.S. With his brother Paolo, has been involved in large-scale narcotic and alien smuggling. And we saw a picture of him a few minutes ago with Frank Sinatra and Paul Castellano. Vincent the Chin. It's pretty interesting, isn't it? Iggy, Eggy. See all the nicknames? Fat Sonny. Larry Nose. Cockeye Benny, one of the Pontiac brothers. Tony Nose. Big Pat, Patsy Pagano. Joseph Valachi from the Valachi Papers, a trusted mafia member and part of the Anthony Strollo narcotic smuggling and distributing organization, wholesale heroin to major mafia narcotic traffickers on the Upper East Side of New York City. I mean, it is as thick as a phone book. All of these mugshots and all of these files. Even in Canada. Italy. A lot of information in this book. So that's the FBI file. Pretty thick book. Next, I've got two more things, and these are sort of like how the mafia has sort of become a part of our culture here in America. This book is called Mob Kings, Made Men That Ruled the Screen. So it's showing You've got the Godfather. Robert De Niro was a young Godfather. And it goes through all the movies. Like, for example, My Blue Heaven is really the same story as Goodfellas. A lot of people don't know that. And how gangsters and mafiosos have just become a part of our cultural fabric in America. With James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart, Edward G. Robinson. Shows you the sort of a chart of what the family looks like. Now, some like Public Enemies, this isn't the mafia. I mean, they put some movies in here that don't really have much to do. It's just crime. Like, you could say Mean Streets. I don't know about The Usual Suspects, really. Boardwalk Empire, definitely. But they just kind of throw in a lot of filler in this book. The Bronx Tale I used to really, really like. I was disappointed with the lead actor getting in trouble with the law. Makes it kind of hard to watch. I always kind of hate that. Pulp Fiction has nothing to do with the mafia. Carlito's Way does, kind of. American Gangster, sort of, kind of. Miller's Crossing. Gangs of New York is very fictionalized. Road to Perdition, or some people call it Road to Sedation. Donnie Brasco is a good mafia movie. Bugsy, of course, we talked about that. The Departed, I guess you could talk the Irish Mafia. The Sopranos. The Untouchables, heavily fictionalized about Al Capone. Scarface, which was a remake of a movie with Paul Muni about Al Capone. Once Upon a Time in America, definitely about the mafia. Casino, good, one of the, maybe next to Goodfellas, and I really enjoyed The Irishman too. Goodfellas, of course, is probably next to The Godfather, the biggest mafia classic movie. And it's got a section about Martin Scorsese. He's made a lot of these movies. Then it has a little section about the real gangsters, like the real Henry Hill, Al Capone, Frank Nitti, John Dillinger, Frank Lucas, Virginia Hill. Judith Exner. So that's just kind of it's one of those things you get in the checkout line. This is a big Life magazine, Mobsters and Gangsters. So it's gonna, once again, we're talking about, I mean, not just the mafia, but it has a mixture of truth and Hollywood. And it goes into, like, you know, Jesse James and Frank James, the Wild Bunch. Yellow Star. John Dillinger. That's Arnold Rothstein. Pretty Boy Floyd. A lot, I mean, this isn't really the mafia. This is really, this is the Prohibition era, Depression era gangsters. Mad Dog Cole was connected to the mafia. Dutch Schultz was definitely Jewish mafia. Al Capone. St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Virginia Hill. Those are the two Dons I told you about. Oh, that's Masseria and Maranzano. And there's Lucky Luciano. Frank Costello. When the Kefauver hearings were put on television in the 50s, they only showed his hands. They never showed his face. Which is a little bit interesting trivia. Meyer Lansky in Las Vegas. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. Albert Anastasia. Carlo Gambino. Jimmy Fratiano, who wrote The Last Mafioso. Henry Hill. Villaci. Luigi was a photographer during the Great Depression. He was played by Joe Pesci, who was a great match for him in a movie called The Public Eye. And he did great photographs of candid pictures of mafia hits and the Hell's Kitchen kind of neighborhoods. I mean, his photographs are like art, capturing a time period, especially the 1930s and 40s. And these are the lawmen, Hoover, Kennedy, and then we get to the mythology, what makes us so addicted to the stories of these gangsters. Why do we want to keep telling these stories and watching these movies? Why do we watch The Sopranos? It's George Raft, Bugsy Siegel, Frank Sinatra, that same picture I showed you. That's Lana Turner and her boyfriend Johnny Stompanato, who was a gangster. Is it the clothes that they wore? Is it the palaces they lived in? The cars they drove? So, the mystique. You know, what was it? Just they did whatever they wanted while the rest of us work and toil and pay our taxes and try to do everything right. And these people would just fly by, so does it make them sort of folk heroes? That's the question. What is the allure and what is it about them that makes them so mysterious? Interesting. A lot of things to think about. But I hope you enjoyed the video anyway. We talked about a lot of books here. And so if you're interested in any of these, look for them. These are all good reads. They'll all give you some kind of insight, and some of them have great pictures that you'll only find in these books. You won't find them on the internet. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time, if you like my channel, subscribe, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, click the bell icon, and I'll be back next time. Bye.